And welcome back to the Upside Sports Network. My name is Michael. Appreciate you guys joining us on an early Sunday morning. Week 1 is finally here after months and months and months of waiting for football to be back. It's finally here, so let's get right into it. We do fantasy football here on this show here. We're going to go ahead and go through every single one of these lineup questions that you guys have, so feel free to submit them. Most of your lineups should be basically set because this is week 1. Your draft, you should have drafted very well if you paid attention to any of our fantasy football draft night shows. You can check those out here on YouTube if you haven't, but you can check out those videos if you haven't already drafted your league. But if you paid attention, most of your lineup decisions are already made. There's only a small tinkering that can be done with inactives and injuries that are happening. George Kittle is officially out for week 1. Zach Ertz was thought to be out for week 1. He will play, but we'll get into some of those other lineup questions for you guys. Michael Gallup is out for week 1. Who are you going to fill in there if you're relying on him in deeper leagues? But let's get right into our week 1 winning lineups. All right, so as I mentioned here, we've drafted a bunch of teams with you guys, and one of these was this league here. We'll go ahead and just jump through this one just so you guys can kind of see how to set your lineup first, and then we'll get into some lineup questions that you guys have. First and foremost, this league, we drafted Joe Burrow as our quarterback, our other option anyway. There wasn't one, so we're going to have to start Joe Burrow week 1. Projected for 18.1 fantasy points. Now, ESPN projections or Yahoo projections, whatever site you're using for fantasy football, they'll give you an idea of what to expect for that game. That way you know if you're really tough or have a really tough decision between two players, you want to lean, or if you want to lean on that projection, you can, but you want to focus on the matchup itself and the quarterback itself. So for Joe Burrow, obviously coming off of that Super Bowl run last year, that offense really took that. He really took that offense to the next level. The final 2 weeks of the regular season and then into the playoffs. Do we expect that to continue against a very good Pittsburgh Steeler front? I do. Joe Burrow should be very safe along with a number of other quarterbacks out there. As far as the running back position, I drafted Nick Chubb and J.K. Dobbins are my number 1 and 2. Dameon Pierce and A.J. Dillon, my 3 and 4. I'm going to stick with Chubb as my number 1. A tweet just came out from Adam Schefter saying that the Ravens are expected to be very cautious with J.K. Dobbins. I don't really have another lineup that I could trust in week 1 outside of maybe Dameon Pierce, but it's week 1. He's a rookie running back. I wonder how much they're going to rely on him. And of course, they're going up against a really good defensive front, at least last year in the Indianapolis Colts. They're without their defensive coordinator, so we could see some change there with the Indianapolis Colts. I'm just hesitant to start a rookie in my lineup week 1. J.K. Dobbins, of course, missed the entire season last year with an injury over the final 6-7 weeks of his rookie year, though. He was averaging about 17 fantasy points a game. Am I expecting that today against the Jets? Honestly, I am. I think he's going to really be one of your fantasy studs this week. That Jets front, while their defense is improved, I expect the Ravens to run roughshod all over them. And while Lamar Jackson is in a contract year, he's going to be looking for, he's got something to prove this year. And so he's going to have that offense clicking on all cylinders today, even though the game is on the road for week one. Receivers, I am very set with my top two picks. You're going to set it and forget it this year with Justin Jefferson, players like Deebo Samuel. Go ahead and set your lineup and just forget about it. Those players are going to be studs for you. If you drafted Cooper Kupp in your lineup for week one, go ahead and lock him in there. Obviously, he's already set in your lineup. But if you drafted guys like Jamar Chase, Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, CeeDee Lamb, those are players you expect to start in your lineup every single week. If you drafted them in the second round and you're not, or first or second round, and you don't expect them to be your starter every single week, why did you take them so early? If you paid attention to our fantasy draft video, I told you guys to avoid Cam Akers. Wow, what a shock. He took 3 carries, played 12% of the snaps. Yikes. As far as Darrell Henderson, I told you guys to grab him in the late round. Look how many carries he had. I told you guys to avoid Leonard Fournette. Hopefully you guys paid attention to that advice this year. Leonard Fournette early on in the season should still get a decent amount of carries. He's going to be the starting running back there for Tampa Bay. And even against Dallas, they should still have some decent success. But that offensive line is not conducive for a running back of Leonard Fournette's caliber. He's not going to be able to run between the tackles, and that's where he really excels. And so we're expecting probably 2-3 yards and a pile of dust. By week 6, I expect him to be demoted from that starting running back role as Tom Brady changes from a run offense, or allowing him to run the ball in that offense, to a quick passing game. Think back to the final years in New England where they didn't have a running game. Their running game was the short passing game with Julian Edelman. It was the short passing game with James White. And that's exactly what I expect this year from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They are starting 3 new offensive linemen, I believe, this year. 2 or 3 of them. Stinney is out for the year. I can't remember the other one that's out for the year. Jensen is out for the year as well. I hope so. I mean, if you hear about playoff Lenny, I don't think you're going to see any Lenny this year. But you got to hope for something better. As far as production. But for my money, I'm avoiding Leonard Fournette. In fact, if I have a number 3 running back, like a J.K. Dobbins, like a Dameon Pierce, I might even start them over the top of Leonard Fournette. Other guys that I might not start him in front of, maybe Josh Jacobs would be one of the other guys that I'm not starting in front of Leonard Fournette. But for me, fade those type of players if you can. Hopefully you didn't draft them in your league, so if you've been paying attention to our videos. The final 2 spots in our lineup as far as flex positions, tight end, I got Travis Kelce and Kyle Pitts, just the way the draft fell in this one. I got 2 elite tight ends. I expect Kyle Pitts to have a fantastic year. I could go with Amon-Ra St. Brown. As you can tell, the projection for him is really high for a Detroit Lions receiver anyway. Remember, he finished the final 5 weeks of the year as the number 2 fantasy wide receiver. So I expect Jared Goff to work with him early. Now, as we get to week 7, week 8, week 9, when Jameson Williams comes back, I could see a decrease in his production. But for my money right now, I still want the top 2 tight ends in my lineup here. Now, if you don't have these 2 tight ends in your lineup and you're trying to decide whether to put T.J. Hockenson as your second or as your flex anyway, don't do that. I mean, that's when you want to go with somebody who's going to be a little bit more of a target monster. I have Amon-Ra St. Brown. I could do A.J. Dillon. I could do Dameon Pierce. Any one of those players I'd rather put over players like T.J. Hockenson or Dalton Schultz, players like that. The top 3 tight ends are the only ones that I'd ever consider as options anyway for that flex spot. If you're starting a tight end, not name those 3 players, you're making a mistake. Change your lineup right now. So that's kind of where everything stands as far as my lineup. Let's go ahead and go over to the waiver wire and just see who's available. Obviously, you'll have your quarterbacks. If you're looking to the waiver wire for quarterback in week 1, you did something wrong. But we'll start with the quarterback waiver wire. Tua Tagovailoa is available in this league. I'm not going to draft him or move him onto my roster. I have a good quarterback already. If I need a bye week fill-in at some point and Tua is still there, great. But I'm not going to roster him just for that purpose. As far as the running backs, that's really where you want to focus your attention after week 1, because there's going to be a couple of running backs that are going to go off. Alexander Madison could be one of those guys just because that Minnesota offense is going to be great this year. for fantasy purposes. They're going to at least support two top 20 fantasy receivers in Thielen and Justin Jefferson. The tight end, Irv Smith Jr., should be a borderline #1 tight end this year. And then as far as the running back situation, of course they have Dalvin Cook, but Alexander Mattison is a great running back. And if Cook goes down with injury yet again, he's obviously going to be a 20-plus point producer in that lineup. He's in the contract year. There's some rumblings about a trade request. We'll see if they ultimately do something with that. But as long as he's on the Minnesota Vikings, you might want to roster Alexander Mattison if you're a Dalvin Cook owner, just because of the injury issues that Cook has had in the past. That, and I think Mattison could have a role in this offense even with Cook on the roster, or even with Cook in the lineup. How much of an impact? We're probably not talking like 20 points a game, but we're probably talking in the neighborhood of 8 to 10. That's decent backup running back numbers, and for those of you in deeper leagues, that might actually get you somebody who you can start on flex or on the when players go on a bye. But Alexander Mattison is a great handcuff for Dalvin Cook. You might want to pick him up like in this league if you're a Dalvin Cook owner. Other running backs that are available, nobody of really real interest for me except for maybe Brian Robinson as the year goes along. Expect him to be out for at least the first 4 weeks of the season as he's not eligible to return at the moment. We'll see how he performs once he comes back. I'm waiting to see what type of or how they use him when they bring him back before I even consider rostering him. But for now, he's going to lay on the waiver wire. Wide receivers in this league, Jarvis Landry is still here. Dotson is here. Jones is here. Galladay is here. Nobody of real interest to me either. Landry's probably the one name that could have some role in the offense early on just because Michael Thomas is back. Olave's there, but I still think they're going to use Jarvis Landry. How much? Not a lot. We're still probably looking 8 to 10 targets a game maximum. You remember back when the Miami Dolphins days, he was a wide receiver 2 anyway. With the Cleveland Browns, he was more of a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3. We're just going to see more of that wide receiver 3 potential out of Landry this year. So if you need help at wide receiver, he could be an option for you in deeper leagues. But again, I'm not rostering him in this league. It's not worth having him there. Now, as far as my tight end position, of course, I have 2 of the elite ones. If you're looking for a tight end today, say you have George Kittle and you just need somebody, Tyler Higbee's out there in a number of leagues. He's only rostered in 50% of leagues right now. Evan Ingram is only being rostered in 20% of leagues. He's going to be a red zone target for the Jacksonville Jaguars this year. Keep an eye out for him. And Austin Hooper is probably your bye week or as your injury fill-in today. According to Mike Clay of ESPN anyway, says that he's probably the one guy you want out there. He's going up against a New York Giants defensive group anyway that has never really had success at that linebacker spot in years. Austin Hooper is a pass-catching tight end, and they do use their tight ends in that Tennessee offense. So if you're needing somebody to fill in today, he might be the guy you choose from. Of course, Robert Tonyan from Green Bay. Aaron Rodgers doesn't have a lot of familiar targets to throw to, so Tonyan could be one of those guys. Isaiah Likely had a huge preseason. Are the Ravens really going to use another tight end as effectively as Mark Andrews? Remains to be seen. You remember years ago they had Hayden Hurst and Mark Andrews. Well, we saw how good they worked with 2 tight ends, so maybe a second tight end could be fantasy relevant this year for them. And then, of course, Tampa Bay got Kyle Rudolph this offseason if you're really deep at tight end and you just need somebody at this point. But for my money, Evan Ingram is the best of this group. Hayden Hurst is the starter now in Cincinnati, I believe, taking over for Uzamoa, who went to the Jets anyway. But for my money, Evan Ingram is the guy you want this season just because of the target share I think he's going to have in that Jacksonville offense in the red zone. Going to the defense, I already picked up the Broncos defense in my leagues anyway. I think they're going to be a great week 1 and week 2 option if they're available in your league. Go ahead and scoop them up. Again, the Denver team is going up against the Seattle Seahawks in week 1. They're going up against at home the Houston Texans in week 2. So they're going to be a great defense for both weeks. Go ahead and scoop them up if you're going for bye week or if you're going for a streaming defense. And then of course kicker. Your kicker should pretty much be set. Great kickers out there. But if you're needing somebody on the waiver wire, say your kicker, you just don't have a lot of faith in, there's not a lot of inspiration here either. Greg Joseph isn't very accurate for that Minnesota Vikings team. In my opinion, I think you could do better. The one guy I would probably get is Mason Crosby, just because I think the potential for longer kicks is there, especially early in the season with Mason Crosby as that as the Packers offense gets familiar with itself. I think they're going to settle for a lot of field goals early, so Mason Crosby could be a top 10 kicker for you early on in the season. But let's kind of go ahead and do all positions. And go ahead and go to all players. Let's start with quarterbacks. Now, as I mentioned, if you've drafted a quarterback, obviously you want to start them in week one. Say you drafted Josh Allen, you got off to a great start. You already got 31 points in ESPN standard scoring. Congratulations. You probably have the number one quarterback in fantasy this year. Number two today, according to ESPN, is Patrick Mahomes. I, I'm not sure about that. I just think that there's other quarterbacks that could do better for, especially early on. I think that Kansas City offense is going to be more run heavy, especially early on. Now that they don't have Tyreek Hill to really hit that home run for them. But are you really going to bench Patrick Mahomes? No, I'm just saying that you could see your quarterback not perform as well as you had hoped when you drafted them in the second or third round. Hopefully, you waited on your quarterback and you got him later on in the fifth or sixth. If you did, great value for you, and we'll see how they do. Justin Herbert could be an MVP favorite as well, along with Josh Allen. As far as who's going up against, the Vegas Raiders, they have really improved that defensive front there. We'll see how much production they get out of that Chargers offense. Austin Eckler's there. They do like to throw to him out of the backfield. They do run it quite a bit as well, but Herbert is still going to be fantastic for you. Projected 20 points today for ESPN Standard Leagues. I think he's probably going to outscore Patrick Mahomes. I just think it's going to be more of an offense-heavy game. Even with the improvements the Raiders made on defense, I still think there are some holes that they're going to have to fill. Lamar Jackson is going to be a man on a mission today. I expect he's another guy I expect to outscore Patrick Mahomes. And as far as rushing, he's really going to be. That's where I think you're really going to see the difference in him and the other quarterbacks out there. I think he probably rushes for at least one touchdown today. Hopefully, if you're a J.K. Dobbins owner, he doesn't vulture yet another one. But I think Lamar Jackson gets into the end zone today. Kyler Murray is going to have a great start to the season, as he always does, but I expect him to fade later on. So expect 20 plus, maybe even 25 plus fantasy points against that Kansas City defensive front. Jalen Hurts, he's Matthew Berry's ride or die anyway. You might have remembered him from Fantasy Football Now on ESPN. He's now with Peacock and NBC. He's part of the Sunday Night Football cast anyway. But he's probably the one guy in fantasy football that I've followed basically since I started doing fantasy football 20 years ago. And he's the fantasy football ride or die for Matthew Berry. I think he's going to be great in week one. The matchup against the Detroit Lions, while they do have an improved defensive front, I expect that defense to get off to a slow start as they get familiar with each other. A lot of rookies on that secondary in that defense for you. And so Jalen Hurts should have a great fantasy day. Now, as far as the other players on that Philadelphia offense, A.J. Brown I expect to have a decent day. Dallas Goedert should have a decent day. But everybody else, I'm not expecting much for. So for those of you who own Devontae Smith, for those of you who own Miles Sanders, hopefully you're benching them. Hopefully you don't even have Miles Sanders on your roster. I think you're pretty much, even in bye weeks, he's not going to be he's not going to be good enough to start over somebody else on your roster. So if you have Miles Sanders, good luck to you. I just don't think you're going to have a good year. Other quarterbacks of note, Tom Brady has that offensive line that has all those issues up front. Projected for 19 fantasy points in week one. I think we're underselling a little bit just because week one, you remember how great he was last year against the Dallas Cowboys. I expect him to be just as good in week one against the Cowboys this year. Now, of course, those offensive line issues up front, the new receivers outside, the missed training camp time, all could play a role, but I expect him to still get right around that 19 to 20 fantasy points. He's going to be a rock-solid quarterback for you this year. I think he's pretty much set as a top 10 guy. I think he's also set as a top 5 guy just because I think as the year goes along, they're going to throw the ball quite a bit more than they are going to run it, especially with Lenny going to the bench later on this season. I expect that to happen. I expect that short passing game to replace that running game, and so Brady should have a great year for you. Really high floor. How high is the ceiling? I don't know how high it is, but that floor is really high for you. So if you need a rock solid quarterback in week one, hopefully if you have 2 quarterbacks in your league, say you have Trey Lance as one of your quarterbacks, Tom Brady is the other, I'm starting Tom Brady week one because I want to see Trey Lance, see what he has to do, or see what production he can provide for me. There's going to be a lot of running for Trey Lance, I expect this year, but I want to see how he does throwing the ball. Sounds like there could be some issues with getting in sync with his receivers, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle, all those players. While I expected them to have big years at the outset of preseason, I'm beginning to hear some rumblings Trey Lance isn't exactly the most accurate quarterback, and Kyle Shanahan has said as much in his interviews with the media. We'll see how he does after week one. Aaron Rodgers, of course, is there. And then, of course, it kind of drops off from there. Dak Prescott, Russell Wilson, Matthew Stafford. We already saw how abysmal that performance was. That offensive line for the Rams was porous. They gave up 7 sacks. It wasn't just the loss of Whitworth either. And sure, the Buffalo Bills defense has a great defensive front, but they did not blitz one time in that game. That's a big problem for the Rams. I just don't see how they're going to have much success if the offensive line doesn't protect Matthew Stafford better than what they did in week 1. Now, they go up against a cookie anyway in the Atlanta Falcons in week 2, but obviously see week 1, only 7.8 fantasy points for Matthew Stafford, several picks in that game as well. Just not a lot of effectiveness. They didn't use Cam Akers, obviously. They didn't use Allen Robinson, which was a little bit of a surprise to me. I expected them to try to introduce him and get him comfortable in that offense early. They did not, and we'll see how they go in week 2 and week 3 and beyond. But for my money, if you have another quarterback on your roster, I'd avoid Matthew Stafford for at least the next couple of weeks because I don't see them solving their offensive line issues until at least week 5. But hopefully they're able to solve it sooner. If you're a Rams fan, you're hoping to win the division and win the Super Bowl this year, you're going to have to fix that offensive line. I think you're going to have to make an acquisition in order to get it done, just because I don't see the improvement coming from within. Now, as far as the running backs are concerned, Jonathan Taylor, of course, was your starting running back at the beginning of the preseason anyway. He's the number 1 guy on your board. Other guys to consider, obviously, let's go kind of based on projected points here. Christian McCaffrey is expected over 21 as well. When Christian McCaffrey is healthy, he is going to get a massive workload. He got over 20 points a game when he did get his workload last year. We saw how good he was. We'll see if he does so again. He's at home against that Cleveland front. Baker Mayfield's under center, so Carolina's got a much better passing game. Much better considering they have Sam Darnold, Cam Newton, P.J. Walker last year. Not saying Baker's going to light the world on fire, but he's going to be better than anything they had last year. And so Christian McCaffrey should easily get to that 20-point marker anyway. He's a good receiver out of the backfield as well. So in PPR leagues, keep an eye on him to kind of go off for week 1. He has no injury issues coming into the season. We'll see if he can stay healthy for a 17-game season. Austin Eckler, other first-round running backs, Alvin Kamara, Derrick Henry, players to kind of keep an eye on. Alvin Kamara, I think, is the one guy, if you're starting him, I'd start him in probably week 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, somewhere in there. Once you get into bye weeks, you can really start to see Kamara's production taper off, just because I don't see him being very productive as the year goes along. I think just because the scheme, the way the Saints have liked to use their running backs in the past. Kamara has, 80 catches in each of the past several years, aside from last year because of injury and poor quarterback play. I think we're going to see more of that as the year goes along this year, but he should get off to a nice start. Today he goes up against an Atlanta Falcons defense that's not going to be able to stop anybody. They're Swiss cheese, and you're expecting probably 2 touchdowns in that game for Kamara. Mixon was a second-round running back this year anyway. He's going up against that Pittsburgh Steelers front. There's a better than likely chance that offensive line is going to benefit Mixon this year as well. And so while he's been steady Eddie over the past couple of years, we'll see if he can have a little bit of a breakout now that he has improved offensive line. I told you to avoid Leonard Fournette. How he's being projected for 17 fantasy points is, I believe, because he's going to be the starter and because he's going up against that Dallas Cowboys defense. But I'm still not expecting 17 fantasy points. I'm expecting probably in the neighborhood of 10 to 12. Probably 40 to 70 yards rushing, maybe a couple of catches and a touchdown. As far as anything more than that, I think it's pure. If you're hoping for more than that, I think you're fooling yourself. I think your best chance for Leonard Fournette to have the most success this year is in the first couple of weeks, so maybe he goes off, but I'm not expecting it. James Conner is one of my top 10 running backs this year. He's only projected for 17 fantasy points in week 1. Go ahead and fix that right now. He's going to get over 20. I expect at least a touchdown, over 100 yards against that Kansas City front, and we're probably expecting at least a couple of pass catches out of the backfield. Now that Edmonds is in Miami, expect to see an increased workload for James Conner. We saw, 18 touchdowns or something like that last year for Conner. And I expect something very similar this year, maybe in the neighborhood of 15 to 17. But I'm still expecting a great year for James Conner. Now, as we get down into this level of running back and your running back 2, running back 3, some of your roster decisions that you need to make. Antonio Gibson was one of the guys that was drafted really late in drafts, was expected not to be the starter this year for the Commanders with Brian Robinson. Of course, the injury to Brian Robinson that he sustained as a the victim in that shooting anyway. Hopefully he's on the mend. Sounds like he's already getting off of his crutches and is starting to do at least some walking around, and he should be on the mend very quickly. But Antonio Gibson for the first 4 weeks of the season should be very fantasy relevant for you guys. Now, for those of you who drafted receivers in your first, second, and third rounds, hopefully you guys have better running backs than Antonio Gibson, but in the case that you don't, say you drafted Josh Jacobs because he was the last running back left at the top, and maybe another guy, Antonio Gibson is going to be better than Josh Jacobs in week 1, week 2, and beyond, at least for now until Robinson is healthy. So Antonio Gibson could be a starter for you if you did receiver early on. If you drafted a quarterback early on, maybe you still have a hole at running back, he could be a fit for you there. Another guy to expect big production out of early on, Elijah Mitchell. Now, with Trey Lance taking over as quarterback there, I expect them to run the ball quite a bit, and very effectively, I might add. With the kind of a dual threat option at quarterback, that's going to open the holes up just that much more for Elijah Mitchell. And so I'm expecting at least one long run today, at least a touchdown. They're projecting 14.4 fantasy points. He's another guy I expect to outscore Leonard Fournette today. So if you have him on your roster, go ahead and start him over playoff Lenny. Other running backs that you might want to keep an eye on that we drafted later on. We'll kind of scroll all the way down here to Dameon Pierce. Again, he's only projected for 10.9. The only reason why I'm not starting him over Dobbins, even though Dobbins is said to be they're going to be cautious with him in Baltimore, is just because I think rookie running backs in week 1, new coaches don't usually trust them as much. I think they're going to be more of a split workload with Rex Burkhead. And after week 1, then you can really see Dameon Pierce kind of take off. But I'm going to go ahead and hold him on the bench for now. And I really want to see how A.J. Dillon does before I really start him in my lineup with Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones is going to be a fantasy lock for you guys. But should I play Dillon or Kirk? I would start Kirk easily, just because I think Kirk is going to be assured probably 6 to 8 catches on probably 10 to 12 targets. He's going to be a monster target in that offense. I think you're expecting, just on catches alone, 6 to 8 fantasy points. Yardage wise, I don't expect a lot of yardage. Probably in the neighborhood of 40 to 70 yards, I would say, for Kirk. And so I still expect double-digit fantasy points for Kirk. Dillon, I expect to get into double digits as well. But for Kirk, I think there's a lot easier path to fantasy production, at least week 1. Now in weeks 2 through 18, Dillon probably would be the guy I would start over Kirk. But for my money in week 1, give me Christian Kirk. Let's move on to some of the receivers that you might have questions about. Obviously, if you drafted a first or second round guy, you should be starting them. If you're not comfortable with them, you might have done something wrong in your draft. That might tell you all you need to know. But early on, your fantasy studs obviously are going to be your fantasy studs. Davante Adams sounds like nobody can guard him with the Raiders, at least right now. We'll see if how he does against the Chargers. They have an improved secondary with Darwin James anyway getting that extension. Hopefully he remains healthy, and just with the improvements there, they should be a better team. They also signed a top cornerback this offseason, and they have a better pass rush with Khalil Mack. So we'll see how effective he is in week 1. Other wide receivers to kind of keep an eye on, at least early on: Mike Evans, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Brandon Cook. All this group, that if you guys drafted him in your league, you might have questions going into week 1. Keenan Allen should be very effective against the Raiders, though. He's probably the best of that group. The other receiver, Deontay Johnson, is one of the guys I'd probably have early on in the season, just because I think Trubisky's going to have to find somebody to work with in that offense. Pickens should have should be very effective on this roster at the end of the season, but Deontay Johnson's the wide receiver you want early on. He's going to be a target monster for you. Now, as far as touchdowns, I'm not sure if he gets in the end zone. I think they're going to use Najee Harris around the goal line. I think they're going to use Freiermuth, and he's going to vulture some touchdowns from you guys. I think they're going to use Claypool around the red zone. Deontay Johnson's going to be more of in between the 20s. At least that's the way I see it kind of going. And so you're probably looking for 6 to 8 catches there for Johnson. Hopefully you get between 80 and 100 yards. That'd be a great day for Johnson owners. But I'm expecting a little bit less from that, just because it is week 1, it is a new quarterback, it is a new scheme, and they're going to run the ball with Najee Harris, and they haven't improved that offensive line. It's still very porous, and so Johnson should still be effective early on, but I wonder if he's the wide receiver you want later on. Elijah Mitchell or Dillon, leaning towards Eli. That's an easy Elijah Mitchell for me. The dual threat quarterback, Lance, is going to open those running lanes up for Elijah Mitchell. Start Elijah Mitchell if that's your question at the flex spot. Welcome in, Drem. Would you start Mooney, Josh Jacobs, or Ayuk at flex? I'm not starting Ayuk just because of the rumblings you hear about the inaccuracy of Lance early on. Mooney's going to be great for you. I would go Mooney. Josh Jacobs, I don't think he's going to be much of a pass catching option in relation to Mooney. And so I think you're probably hoping for 6 to 8 catches there for Mooney out of the Bears offense. And so I would start Mooney. I don't like any of those 3 options, but if I have to, I'm going Mooney. Go ahead and send your questions to us. Hit that subscribe button. Let us know where you're watching from. Let us know your fantasy questions. If you have lineup concerns that you want to go over, just go ahead and send them to us. We'll see if we can help solve your problems for you guys. Appreciate you, Thomas. But let's go ahead and go over some of these other wide receiver questions further on down here. Courtland Sutton, I expect a big day for him going up against the Seattle Seahawks. Russell Wilson's going to want to make a point against that Seahawks secondary. We'll see how he does. But for me, Courtland Sutton's an easy top 20 guy for you. So if you have him at your flex spot and you're considering whether or not starting Sutton or a guy like Mooney or something like that, I would lean towards Sutton. Hopefully you didn't start Allen Robinson. Hopefully you waited to see how he does in week 1. That's what I did in most of my leagues if I have him on my roster. Adam Thielen, I think you're good to go to start him at your flex spot if he's in your flex consideration. He should be probably 6 to 8 catches in that offense. Even with Justin Jefferson there taking the majority of the work, I think Adam Thielen is a clear-cut number 2 receiver in fantasy. So go ahead and start him comfortably at that flex position. Montgomery or Jacobs at RB2, Montgomery. Jacobs, I just don't trust him yet in that offense. I want to see how McDaniels is going to use him. So I think you're more assuredly going to get better production out of Montgomery. Do you think Jeudy can be top 20? If you paid attention to the fantasy draft videos before the preseason anyway, I told you guys that Jerry Jeudy I expect to be in that consideration for top 15 wide receiver just because the upside, I think they're going to use him in that offense, especially as the year goes on. Do I think Jeudy is top 20 this week? I would prefer Sutton if I had to pick one of the two for at least this week. But Jeudy would be right there, possibly a top 20 receiver this week. But for my money, I'd rather have Sutton for week 1. Again, Russell Wilson's going to try to prove a point against the Seahawks for trading him, for even going after another quarterback in previous years. You remember that this all started years ago when the Seattle Seahawks started scouting other quarterbacks like Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes, and they were like, well, we'll offer the Cleveland Browns the Russell Wilson for the number 1 pick in the Baker Mayfield draft. Russell Wilson heard all of that and wanted out for the longest time. He finally gets out, and now in his first game against the Seahawks, or in his first game since leaving them, he goes up against his former team. He's going to want to prove to them just how good of a quarterback he still is. Now remember, Russell Wilson last year was not the same. He had injury issues. He wasn't as accurate, didn't produce as much fantasy points when he was in there. I expect him to be right back to being the old Russell Wilson, though, at least early, especially considering how focused I expect him to be against the Seahawks. So Jeudy, I think, could be a borderline top 20 guy for you this week. But if I had to pick between the two, give me Sutton for week 1, Jeudy for years beyond that. Russ will definitely be a top 10 quarterback today. So if you're needing a quarterback, if you're debating whether or not to start Russell Wilson or another quarterback around that around that edge of that top 10, start Russell Wilson at least in week 1. After that, though, you might want to start, say, a guy like Joe Burrow instead or Tom Brady instead. But Russell Wilson's going to be great. I do wonder about the injury issues. Thank you for joining us again, Clay. But just like you, I'm really wondering about those injury issues with Russell Wilson, if they're going to percolate up again. But he really showed some decline last year. I wonder if that is just 1 year because of injuries, because of the decline, or if we're really going to see him take that next step in his career with be the next great quarterback the Denver Broncos have. John Elway, the Peyton Mannings, etc. But they think they got their next one. That's why they gave him that big contract. We'll see how it goes. Later on down here in the waiver wire here, or if you're, well, not waiver wire, but later on at your flex spot, if you're considering guys like Juju Smith-Schuster, Renfro, Elijah Moore, out of that group, it sounds like Juju could be the guy that Kansas City is going to target as the number 1, and so I would start him easily over Renfro or Moore or Bateman, Lockett, etc. Would I start him over Adam Thielen? Probably not. I think Thielen's going to be that good of a receiver this year. Welcome in for joining us, SBD. Olave, Monty, or AJ Green? Ouch. I'm wondering who you're referring to as far as Monty. There's a couple different Montgomerys, but um, probably A.J. Green. He's going to be available for you on the waiver wire. I just don't trust a rookie receiver, especially week one. Sounds like Olave's going to have a great year, though, especially for a rookie. But I'd rather have the security of A.J. Green. A.J. Green's going to fill that role in that offense anyway, while DeAndre Hopkins is out now. Do I expect A.J. Green to have a role going forward? Yes, but not enough to be fantasy relevant. But if you're debating between those three, I'm not sure who. Again, David Montgomery? Start David Montgomery. That's not even a question. David Montgomery should, if you drafted him where I think you drafted him, probably 4th or 5th round, if you're not comfortable starting him in week one, what are you doing? I don't know why you drafted him. Now, understandably, the 49ers defense is great. I expect them to be great. But when you're considering going up against, 10th or 11th round draft pick in Olave and a guy who's available on the waiver wire in A.J. Green, give me David Montgomery all day long. I mean, do I expect him to be a top 20 running back this week? Borderline. But again, if you drafted him that high, you have to feel comfortable at least week one playing him, especially considering your other options are Olave and Green. If you're debating it that much, I wonder why you drafted him. I probably would have gone a different direction unless that's just the way the running back position fell for you. You have to feel comfortable starting David Montgomery and hope for the best. You traded Pierce, who I got in the 10th for him. Okay. I still would rather had Dameon Pierce, though. Dameon Pierce, I think, is going to be a better fantasy running back than Montgomery this year. I'm really high on Pierce. How do you feel about Zeke this week against Tampa? Very strongly. Tampa had a number 3 defense against the run last year. They still have had some changes up front. Of course, the Cowboys are without Tyron Smith. The offense for the Cowboys was very pass happy in the game last year. They only ran the ball, I think, 9 times in the game, and then they immediately switched to throwing the ball. I expect Zeke to have a nice week one, though. Do I expect 100 yards? Probably not. Do I expect him to get in the end zone? Yes. I expect them to probably get 60 to 80 yards and a touchdown. So for your running back 2, you're probably looking at 14 to 15 fantasy points for Zeke. I expect to for them to throw to him out of the backfield a lot more than they have in previous years. But for Zeke, he's a low end running back 2 for week 1. We already kind of discussed the tight ends, but let's kind of go over the hierarchy at the top anyway. For me, Travis Kelce for week 1 is going to be number 1. Number 2 is going to be Kyle Pitts. 3 would be Mark Andrews, and 4 would be Waller, at least in my opinion. I just think that there's other options that you could go to. With George Kittle now being out, hopefully you have some other options for you guys at tight end. I usually don't draft 2 tight ends in my league. This one was the rare exception where it ended up I got the top 2 of the top 3 tight ends in fantasy football this year in Kelce and Pitts. I should get some interesting trade offers later on in the season in this league at least. But if you're hoping for tight end fill in for somebody you just don't have a lot of faith in, say you drafted Hunter Henry and you just don't think he's going to have a lot of production against Miami. As far as free agents out there, again, I told you guys to look at Evan Ingram as a possible red zone target. I don't expect a lot of catches for him. I don't expect a lot of yardage, but I expect him to vulture a touchdown early on in the season, and possibly as we keep going, maybe becomes a little bit more familiar in that offense with Trevor Lawrence, and is a big target for him over the middle. Gesicki is probably the 3rd banana in the passing game right now behind Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. They have Cedric Wilson there. They have a couple of good running backs in Mostert and Edmonds. So if you're starting Gesicki over guys like Dawson Knox, who didn't have a great week 1, but over guys like Irv Smith Jr., that's fine. But if you're expecting him to get over, Zach Ertz on a weekly basis or George Kittle on a weekly basis, I wouldn't count on it. But that's kind of where your tight ends are. Again, hopefully you're streaming your defense. Otherwise, the top defenses today, according to ESPN, of course, would be the Saints against the Falcons. I think that's very likely. Marcus Mariota is going to get the start there. Another defense that you may want to start is going to be the Carolina Panthers defense, just because it's Jacoby Brissett. And while they have a ton of offensive weapons for the Browns, it's Jacoby Brissett. So if you're needing to stream a defense, the Panthers could be an option for you. And as I mentioned, the Broncos are my favorite defense this week and next week as kind of a 2-week streaming defense. Last but not least, kickers. I'm not going to talk too much about kickers, but your top kicker, of course, Justin Tucker, Matt Gay, Evan McPherson. Hopefully, you have one of those guys. If you're looking on the waiver wire, we talked a little bit about Mason Crosby. I think early on in the year, he could be a top 5 fantasy kicker for you. So if you don't have a lot of faith in a guy like Tyler Bass, who I told you guys to fade in our draft videos, Mason Crosby could be one of those kickers that you could target. But that's kind of where everything stands. Go ahead and send us your questions. Hit that subscribe button. Really does help us out. Hunter subscribed to us about a couple of days ago. Appreciate you, Hunter, for joining us. Got 16 of you guys with us right now, so thank you guys for joining us. That's kind of how we set up week 1 here for this league. Let's go ahead and do the next league here that we drafted with you guys. As you can kind of see, Ertz was a question mark for week 1, but he's going to be there. He's going to start. He will be available. Other options that I had at the flex spot, I could have started Amon-Ra St. Brown, even though he's projected for more points. I expect that Seattle offense to really go off, so Cortland Sutton is going to start for me. Welcome in, Hayden. Which one? Godwin, Kirk, Deontay, Hardy with return yards. Give me Kirk. Godwin's going to be on a pitch count. Sounds like he's not going to play a full count of snaps there in Tampa Bay. They have plenty of wide receivers to choose from as well. So I would fade Godwin at least for the first couple weeks of the season. But for me, give me Christian Kirk. I think you're probably looking at a solid 12 to 14 fantasy points with potential for 20. And so Christian Kirk is the guy I want out of that group. Told you guys, if you guys are starting Trey Lance, you may want to go with a more secure option, at least in week 1. Rookie quarterback and all, you want to see it before you believe it. As you can see on this roster, I drafted Darrell Henderson. Told you guys to pick him up late in your draft. That's exactly what I did here. And even though he got 12 fantasy points in week 1, he still did fantastic in that game, considering how bad that offensive line played. And every single yard he gained was because of sheer effort and will. And Cam Akers, obviously a footnote in that game. I expect Henderson to be the starter going forward. I think they're going to try to push Akers into that lineup as they keep going, see if they can get something going. But for me, Darrell Henderson's the running back you want out of that Rams offense. Seems obvious to say now, but I called it. Told you guys before the season started. Check my receipts. All right. Now, as far as this team, I'm very solid up top. This league was one of probably my best draft as far as at the top anyway. Back into my draft, I could have done a little bit better. I think there's some spots I could have improved at. But just looking at my running backs, Jonathan Taylor and James Conner, Deebo Samuel fell to me, Jalen Waddle. I think all of those guys are top 10 at their position by the end of the year. Zach Ertz, I think, is a top 10 tight end. Sutton, I believe, is a solid top 20 guy with potential to be top 15. I told you guys to rotate your defenses and kicker. I actually got a good one in McPherson later on. My Jalen Hurts at quarterback is going to be a stud for me this year. This league, I might just go as one of the number 1 teams in this fantasy league into the postseason. I want to just make sure I get into the postseason with every single one of these leagues. It doesn't really matter how you get there as long as you get there. Once you get into the final 5 weeks of the year when the playoffs start for fantasy, that's when you really look for opportunities. That's when you look at guys like Deshaun Watson coming off a suspension as being a back end of your roster just to keep him from other teams, or to start him in your lineup. You just have to see how it goes. But this lineup should do very well week 1. This might be my best lineup week 1. Hurts, I expect over 25 fantasy points. Taylor, I expect over 25. Connor, I expect over 20. Samuel, just because of the inaccuracy concerns I have with Lance early on, I wonder how Samuel's going to be used in the offense, how much they're going to run him. He is going up against a team in transition in the Bears, so 17 fantasy points sounds about right. For Waddle, I expect a lot more fantasy points than this. 13 points for week 1. I expect Hill and Waddle to kind of split receptions, but I think when in trouble, Waddle's going to be the guy Tua Tagovailoa is going to target. And so I think he's still going to have a much better fantasy day. I expect him to get in the end zone against New England as well. So as far as how much to expect out of Waddle, I'm expecting probably 18 fantasy points out of Jalen Waddle today. And Sutton, I already told you how good of a day he's going to have going up against the Seattle Seahawks secondary. Not a very good secondary, not a very good defense at all. They're going to start Geno Smith at quarterback for the Seahawks, and so there's going to be some short field opportunities, I believe, for that Denver offense as well. So there's going to be a lot of touchdowns in this game. And so Sutton's easily going to outscore that 12 fantasy points. And then, of course, I have a really good kicker in McPherson. Again, it's a kicker. I'm not going to spend time on it. You want to really get around 8 to 10 fantasy points. If you get more than that every single week out of your kicker spot, you've done well. And again, stream your defense. Alrighty, so that's kind of how that lineup's set. Just go through every single one of your lineups. If you only drafted one, that's great too. We drafted a bunch with you guys, so we're just going to make sure that we don't have George Kittle on the roster in any one of these leagues. Make sure we don't have somebody that we're not going to start or that's not going to play in week 1. This one here, George Kittle, he's still listed as questionable, so I can't move him to my IR spot. This this roster is absolutely loaded. I mean, look at my roster on this one. This one I drafted very early on. Jalen Hurts, James Conner, Aaron Jones, Deebo Samuel, T. Higgins, Elijah Mitchell, 49ers defense, Justin Tucker, Gabe Davis, George Kittle, Cortland Sutton, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Josh Jacobs, Juju Smith-Schuster, Allen Robinson, and Dameon Pierce. No, I did not make a trade in this league. That's just how deep my roster is. Who am I going to cut to fill in for George Kittle? I wish they'd just move him to out so I could go ahead and put him at IR. We'll have to circle back here probably around 10:30 whenever they do announce the actives and inactives, and then maybe we'll be able to move him to IR. But for right now, I can't cut anybody in this league. I mean, who am I going to bring in? I mean, Evan Ingram, I told you guys possibly, but am I really going to cut, Juju Smith-Schuster for Evan Ingram for a 1-week fill-in? No. Dameon Pierce, I told you guys I expect him to be a top 20 running back. No. I do want to check out the waiver wire just to see if there's anybody who is left there that I might like. I could take Gallup and put him on my bench. I could take Pickens. Darrell Henderson is there. I might even pick him up over Josh Jacobs. We'll see how he goes in week 1. But I have a very deep roster in this league. Let's go ahead and move on to the next one. Just kind of go through every single one of these, see if I can fill in anywhere I need to. If you guys have questions about your fantasy lineup, go ahead and send them to me. If you have questions about trade offers, we sent out several of them after we completed drafts this week. None of them were accepted, unfortunately. Only one of them was actually responded to. They just dropped J.K. Dobbins' production to 0. Let me check the Twitterverse and see if they're going to hold out Dobbins. Okay, so if you're starting J.K. Dobbins today, go ahead and pull him out of your lineup. Diane Rossini reporting that he will not be active today against the Jets. So let's go ahead and go back to the top of our roster. I think I had one of the teams that I had Dobbins in the lineup for. There he is right there. We're going to go ahead and move him out of our lineup. Now, going down this low, I've got 3 running backs to really consider. Mostert, Dillon, and Pierce. I guess I'm going to have to go ahead and start Pierce here. Let's go ahead and make that move there. So I got Chubb and Pierce for week 1. Not a lot of production I expect for either one of them just because it's Jacoby Brissett against a good Panthers defense. You got Pierce as a rookie going up against a good Colts defense. But I still think they should be solid week 1 options for me. A.J. Dillon in other weeks I might consider. But for right now we're going to hold off. But he is going up against the Minnesota Vikings. That Vikings defense is not going to be very good this year. They are on the road. I think they're going to want to get Jones comfortable in that offense first and then Dillon. But I think I'm going to go Pierce. So again, if you have J.K. Dobbins or George Kittle in your lineup, go ahead and pull them out. Just going to go through these really quickly and see if I have either one. Nope. Again, this is that deeper league. Going to go ahead and go with the next option. If you guys have questions about your league, go ahead and send us your questions, any comments, etc. So far, so good. Got a little bit of a dud on my tight end on this one with Dawson Knox only getting me 1.5 fantasy points. So got to hope for some home runs. Joe Burrow is my other quarterback, but yeah, Josh Allen really did well for me. Here's another league where I have Dobbins starting. We're going to go ahead and pull him out. And we're going to put in Pierce. One running back I'm fading this year is James Robinson. While he's a good handcuff for ETN owners, I don't want any part of that running game. I can't count on it. And while ETN I think should have a decent year, I'd still rather have not any, most other running back situations. Just kind of zipping through all these, just making sure I don't have any holes in my lineup. If you have multiple teams, you want to make sure to get this set. George Kittle is on this roster, and Dobbins. Okay, so at the back end of my roster, I could cut George Pickens, and I'm probably going to have to for this one. Let's go ahead and go to the tight ends real quick and just see who's available. Gesicki is actually sitting there for me. Irv Smith Jr. I think I'm going to go with Irv Smith over Gesicki. But we're going to go ahead and drop Pickens, at least in this league. There we go. My first transaction there is to bring in Irv Smith, and he immediately goes into my tight end spot there. Really like this lineup now. Got every position pretty much covered. And I got some potential at the back end of this roster. Just don't want to have, you don't want to have to rely on too much potential. You want solid players. Ertz, this lineup looks good, but I have Prescott as my starter. My other quarterback, I don't have one. Just going to check and see if there's any other quarterbacks on the waiver wire. Maybe somebody dropped someone. Hunter Henry's available. Kirk Cousins is here. I could go for him, but I'd rather stick with just Prescott on this roster. I'm not going to roster Cousins. Again, if you're missing the news, J.K. Dobbins is out for week 1. Gus Edwards is out, so Kenyon Drake is going to see a big role in that Ravens offense. If you do daily fantasy, maybe pick him up as a low-cost option. There we go. There's Diggs on this team, and Dobbins. Who do I want to fill in here? I think A.J. Dillon. This will be the first time I'm going to start him. Adam Thielen. I have 3 great receivers already on this team. Chase, Diggs, and Higgins. I still have Gabe Davis and Thielen. Thielen's my 5th receiver on this team. I think he could be a starter on most other teams this week. Got 2 teams left to just check over the roster real quick. You just want to make sure you don't have any holes in it with Kittle and Dobbins now being out. This is the league where I actually drafted 2 high-end quarterbacks, Mahomes and Hurts. Hurts actually fell really late in this league, past pick 100, so I just had to pick him up. Another deep roster for me here. Not sure about this defense, though. Let me check out and see if I have a better one than the Dolphins. Ravens against the Jets. That should be a good defense. Gallup is still here. Let me go ahead and make that move first. That way I can put him on IR. At the back end of this roster, we're going to drop the Dolphins defense. And then we're going to move Gallup to IR. And I have another roster spot that I can go ahead and pick up my defense that I want. Not bad options here. But let's go ahead and check out the defense. Broncos are still there. Ravens are there. The Eagles against the Lions, no thanks. I think the Broncos defense here is the easy winner for me. Let's go ahead and put them in. And I like how it immediately puts it into my starting lineup. Very nice. Welcome in, Jason. Raiders-Chargers game. Who you picking to win? It's in LA. I do like both teams, but give me the Chargers. I think Herbert's going to get off to a nice start. I like Eckler as far as the running back situation there a little bit better. And the defense, while both are improved, I think with a healthy Derwin James, I think that makes the difference late in the game. Even though I don't think anybody can cover Devontae Adams. I just think the Chargers are just set to go this year. And there's the Pittsburgh roster, and that's it. That's all of my rosters are now set. Hopefully you guys got your roster set with us. If you have any questions, go ahead and send them to us now. We'll hang out with you guys for probably about another 10, 15 minutes or so. So if you guys have any questions, go ahead and send them now. We will join you guys again probably around noon for the Browns and Panthers game. Check in on a few others as well. But primarily we'll watch the revenge game of Baker versus the Browns. You're welcome, Jason. You're welcome. Team Valencia got off to a really nice start. Let's see who they went with. Cooper Kupp and Josh Allen. Pretty good, I'd say. 63 points. George Kittle is out. J.K. Dobbins is also out. Well, yeah, but I think the LA crowd will start to come around to the Chargers once they realize how good this team has been, and they've put up with it for the last couple of years. I think the Chargers will start developing a fan base because they like winning. Do I start Ezekiel or David Montgomery today? If your choice is between those two, probably David Montgomery, although I still think Ezekiel Elliott's still a low-end running back 2, high-end running back 3 today. Montgomery, I think, is still a low-end running back 2, just maybe one spot ahead of Zeke. But very close. I think both will end up in the end zone today, though. As you can see, this roster, I'm hoping for a win every single week with Kyle Pitts. I should get one over Schultz. I really like Debo over Marquise. I really like both of my running backs over Ezekiel Elliott and Leonard Fournette today in this matchup. My quarterback should be fairly close with Allen and Hurts. Juju versus Renfro, give me Schuster. And then my defense, I really like the Broncos defense against Seattle. The Colts should do well, though. And then kicker's about a wash. So I've got a lot of points to make up already. But I think I've got enough potential on this roster to be able to get there. Some weeks when you get down by 63 points and they've only played 2 of their players, you may lean towards more guys that have home run potential. Christian Kirk could be one of those guys for you. but I still think I'd rather have Juju over Kirk, at least for week 1. I want to see the better offense is basically what I'm betting on here, is that the Chiefs offense will work better than the Jaguars offense. That's kind of how this roster broke down. We'll look at this matchup anyway that I have right now in this league, how it stacks up. Herbert, I would probably take over my quarterback in Burrow. I also like their McCaffrey over Chubb. I like Mixon over Pierce. So they're already 3-0 over me. However, this is where I start to pick up with Justin Jefferson over Terry McLaurin. It's not close. Debo over Marquise Brown, not close. Kelsey over Knox, not close. However, they do have James Conner at their flex. Ouch. That hurts. If you guys have paid attention, James Conner is one of my favorite picks this year. I think he's going to hurt me in this league and might cost me a win. I still like my defense better than their Packers, and my kicker's about a wash. How much more of an advantage are their 3 over mine? Not much. I really like my chances in this league, though. James Conner, though, has the chance to really switch things around for me. Or in his favor, away from me, anyway. Let's check out Kansas City. That's the league I'm in on this one. Nobody's had any starters yet, so that's good. All right, Hurts versus Herbert. Pretty much a wash, in my opinion, for week 1. Taylor versus McCaffrey, same. Give me James Conner over Etienne easily. Give me Debo over Hill easily. Give me Waddle over Mooney easily. They have Kelsey over Ertz, obviously. Mitchell and Sutton should be fairly close. I like my defense a little bit better, and kicker's a wash. So this league could be this one could be fairly competitive for me. I got a couple of Monday night guys on the Denver side. Their lineup should all be solved through the Sunday night game. So going into Monday, I'll probably be behind, and Sutton probably will push me over the top. Just kind of checking out how my matchups fare. Team Mully looks like they started. Who did they start? The Bills defense. They got 18 points in week 1. Original San Diego Chargers fan living in Salt Lake. Raiders fans here are friendly and nice. When I wear my Chargers hat, kind of strange from the norm growing up in San Diego. Brady or Dak has a better game. Brady all day long. I think Dak, for week 1, I don't think they're going to rush him as much. I think they're going to try to use their weapons first and see what they got. After week 1, then I could see Prescott, if this game were to be played, say in week 5, I would say Prescott would have the better game between the two, but give me Brady. Shout out from Wyoming. Cool. Been to Wyoming a couple of times. Nice place. I'm playing against Stefon Diggs this week, so I need ceiling plays. Full PPR. Start 2. Sutton, Higgins, or Hollywood Brown. I'm out on Hollywood Brown this year, so easily Cortland Sutton and T. Higgins. It's not going to be close. Plus, Marquise Brown has the drops. I mean, at best, you're looking for, 3 catches. Maybe one of them goes for 50 yards. Let's say that happens, and it goes for a touchdown. Best case scenario for Marquise Brown, you're looking 70 yards and a touchdown with 3 catches. So that's going to be, 11... about 14 fantasy points is kind of your maximum for Brown. But T. Higgins, I think, has the target share of probably 6 to 8 catches, 80 to 100 yards with a touchdown. Sutton, probably about the same. So I think both of those players you should put in your lineup over Hollywood Brown. Look at this league here anyway, just see how the matchup kind of played. Just see how the lineup was. Hurts versus Rodgers, give me Hurts all day long, especially week 1 when Rodgers is still trying to figure out how to throw to his new receivers. McCaffrey and Eckler, about a wash. I think Eckler's pass catching is going to make his production be very similar to McCaffrey. However, when McCaffrey is in the lineup, or when he's healthy, he is a little bit better than than every single running back in the NFL. But I still think it's a wash. Give me Conner over Swift easily, in my opinion. I'm that high on James Conner this year. Swift, I think they're still going to try to figure out things on that Detroit offense. Welcome in Jameson. Pick 3, PPR, Juju, Cooks, Michael Thomas, and Godwin. Ugh. You have one good option in Juju. The rest, I don't know. Godwin is on a snap count. Thomas is going to be in a rotation at receiver. Do you have any other receivers on that roster, Jameson? I mean, anybody. Will the Jags win 4 games this year? Yes. I think the Jags get up to 6-7 wins. If you can check out our season or our Super Bowl prediction video, we did roster projections for every single team, or win projections anyway for every single team. We even went into as far as how many coaches would be fired at the end of the year in that video. So go ahead and subscribe. You can check out that video here on YouTube. Do you have any other receivers, Jameson? But if I had to pick out of that group, I guess it'd be Juju, Cooks, and then give me Robert Woods, I guess. I don't trust Amari Cooper with Brissett. That's a rough wide receiver group, man. PPR. Woods might not get a lot of catches, though, either. That's a rough wide receiver group. So, Juju 1, Cooks 2. Brissett's got to throw to somebody, so if I had to go Godwin or Cooper, I'd go Cooper. Cooper or Thomas, I'd still probably go Cooper. It'd come down to Woods or Cooper for that final spot. Ooh. Okay, I'd probably go Cooper just because I think he probably gets more catches than Woods, even though I think Woods is going to end up with a better yardage on the day anyway. So Juju, Cooks, and Cooper, although I don't like any of those options outside of Juju. You might want to make a trade request to somebody at some point in that league. But the rest of this roster here, Waddle versus Allen, give me Waddle in week 1. Sutton versus Cooks, give me Sutton. Kelsey versus Hawkinson, don't make me laugh. Judy versus Hunt, again, don't make me laugh. My defense is going to have a tough task trying to equal the Bills' defense in week 1, but my kicker should be a wash. So all in all, should be very competitive. Kelsey's where I really have to get an advantage, though, along with Judy. That's kind of how that league's going to go. Let's check out another league just to see how the rosters shape up. I'm already in a 31-point hole. And I'm not going to have a tight end, at least until they announce it, or until they move Kittle. Getting a whole bunch of notifications now of the inactives and inactives. Let's go back real quick, one screen here. Check out my team. See if I can put Kittle on IR yet, and I can't. I'm not cutting somebody, although I might have to. Josh Jacobs, I might have to cut you. Even though I do need another running back. I mean, this is a very good roster. I just need a tight end that can play for week 1. I might have to take a 0 at tight end. I think I will. At least unless they let George Kittle go to IR and say he's out. We'll have to see if they eventually do that. Be with you guys for another 5 minutes. If you got any more questions for us, go ahead and send them now. Look at our matchup in this one. Mahomes versus Brady. I think in week 1 that'll be very close. Kamara versus Pierce. I'm low on Kamara. I still think he's probably a top 20 play in week one. Pierce, I'm more of a top 20 to 30 play in week one. Barkley, I'm completely out on this year. I just don't know what to make of that offense. Brian Dable should have that offense working a little bit better. Do I think Barkley should have a decent week one? I do, but I still like Elijah Mitchell more. Give me Jefferson over Adams, but close. Samuel over Metcalf by a mile. Kittle, of course, is out with injury now. Pitts should have a big advantage this week. Higgins versus Mooney. Give me Higgins. My defense and theirs should be a wash. And then the kickers should be a wash as well. So all in all, my receiver at the second receiver spot and the tight end is where I should make my hay. Appreciate you guys joining us here. Just crossed the hour 15 mark. So we'll stick with you guys here for another couple minutes. Finish here in about 10:40 Central Time. Prepare for the first game of the season anyway, with the Browns and Panthers. Well, first game of the season after the Bills and Rams anyway. Still week one. Let's check out another team here while we wait for you guys. If you have any other questions, go ahead and send them. Here we go. My team going up against, let's see, Burrow versus Mahomes. I'll take Burrow. Well, I think it's more of a wash, but Mahomes probably has a little bit better day. Upside play, though, is Burrow. Harris versus McCaffrey. Mixon versus Hall. Give me Mixon all day long. Judy versus Higgins. Give me Higgins. Kirk versus Amon-Ra. That's about a wash. They have Kelsey versus me having Ingram. That's a big advantage for him with Travis Kelsey. Nick Chubb, big advantage over Garrett Wilson. Defense, hopefully I can make up some ground there. And kicker's about a wash. Does Carr throw 2 picks today? He's very accurate. Best completion percentage, etc. He is going up against the Chargers. They have an improved secondary, a better corner. James is healthy, an improved pass rush. Jacobs isn't going to run the ball as much. Does he throw 2 picks? We'll go ahead and say yes. I think the over-under would be at like 1.5. But early on, teams are going to be making a few more turnovers than they normally would as they get comfortable in their offenses, etc., etc. So I would say yes. Had Gabe Davis on my bench on this one. Hopefully that doesn't come back to haunt me. Check out one last roster for you guys. Do you start Lockett or Patterson at flex? I don't want any part of Lockett this year. Patterson, I think, is going to have to do something for them. So I would go with Patterson. Especially with their backup being out. Looking at this roster here, I got Russell Wilson in week 1. Should have a great fantasy day. I think he's going to have a better day than Prescott. Of course, I have Taylor over Harris, Connor over Williams, Waddle a little bit behind Adams, so advantage for Team Kraft. Johnson versus Evans, give me Johnson. Kelsey versus Ertz, Kelsey. Sutton versus Hall, Sutton. I like my 49ers defense versus the Colts, and then about a wash again at kicker with Carlson a slight advantage. He didn't start Gabe Davis. He has Marquise Brown, and this is not a bad bench here for this guy. But I probably would have done the same thing as him, except for Breece Hall. I would not have drafted him or Mike Evans. I probably would have started Gabe Davis and CEH at those 2 spots. But thank you guys for joining us here. Past the 10:40 mark, we're going to go ahead and log off here and start our stream at noon. For those of you who want to watch some live football, we do have the Sunday ticket here, but we'll be going through the Browns and Panthers game primarily in the early window, kind of just to see how Baker does in his return. If that game gets boring, we can always flip around. As I mentioned, I got Sunday ticket. So if you guys want to watch another game or if you guys have any questions, go ahead and send them to us. Welcome in Darius, Devontae Smith, or Tony. I'm out on Tony this year. That Giants offense is, while improved, I don't think it's going to be very good. And Smith, those are a couple of rough options. For those of you who are Philadelphia Eagles fans, I'm going to go ahead and say Devontae Smith. Do I think it's going to work? No. Do I think it's going to be much of a difference between him and Tony? No. But if I had to pick between those two, give me Smith. Does Herbert rush for 60 yards today? No. He will not rush for 60 yards. If you ask me if he rushes for 20, maybe. 60, no. Are you talking about Khalil or are you talking about Justin? If you're talking about Khalil, I also say no. I think Montgomery's going to get the biggest work out of that offense, and Herbert I don't even think is worth rostering until Montgomery goes down. But thank you guys for asking your questions. If you have any more, you can join us for the 12 o'clock hour. We'll probably start just a bit early. But Justin Herbert, no, 60 yards, not happening. But thank you guys for joining us here. And going to have some breakfast real quick and gear up for football starting. And we'll see you guys shortly. Thank you guys.